Thank you, Sheila. I really am pleased to be here. And before we get on to the gender thing, though, I do want to make a point, and it was about that article. I've often said controversial things and stupid things, sometimes by mistake, sometimes just completely thoughtless, and ended up in a social media storm where I end up staying up at night in a panic-stricken state of hysteria, reading all the nasty, horrible things that people said about me. And I know better than anybody that when someone is in the stocks of public shame over an accidental mistake that they made, it is not fair to join in with the sneering and the smart aleck comments. So when this row all kicked up, and I got a call from Susan Mitchell from the Sunday Business Post to tell me that she had called Joe to help him out to try and get some more women involved, I was absolutely ashamed of myself, because I had joined in and I'd had a go with Joe and had a go with this school, and I, of all people, should have behaved better and should have done what Susan and I believe Ingrid Miley was helping you out there. So I want to apologise to Joe for I let myself down, and I let you, who has put so much work into this organisation over the past 40 years, down as well. And but Joe did ring me, and we kissed and made up, metaphorically, and I was really thrilled to be here because, of course, it is a very important summer school. And, of course, I was doing that thing as well where I was kind of jealous that I hadn't been invited before. So I'm in, and I'm great, and I'm delighted to be here. On the issue itself, you know, I really have been at the forefront of this for my entire career, most particularly my media career, which is now about 13 years old, because I always know I started writing about 6 months after my son was born, and I track it by his age. Now, I was one of those people, I was really fascinated by Peter's speech, that the journey that I've had to travel on and the attitudes that I've had towards other women, apart from myself. I was reared on a farm, and my mother was warned by her mother when she got married, always have your own money and never let him know what you do with it. And they didn't call themselves feminists, but they were feminists. And it never, ever occurred to me when I was growing up that I would be held back by my gender. The only thing I was assured that would hold me back was my own failure to work. So the only limits to my potential were me. And if I worked and if I was a good girl and I learned me lessons and say me prayers, as my father used to say, you would get ahead and nobody could stop you. And I never, questioned that. I completely internalized that. So for that reason, I think as I progressed along quite happily in my career, I was always firmly against things like gender quotas, because I said, well, I don't want to be the quota woman. I want to get whatever I get because I deserved it. And I don't ever want to walk into a room and have the other men at the table saying, oh yeah, she's the quota woman, we had to take her in. So I argued very publicly against quotas for a very long time. And the last time I argued against that was at the Women in Media conference in Ballybunion about 3 years ago. And I was there to argue against it. But one of the speakers in favour of quotas was a woman called Adele Clancy, who's with the 50/50 group. She's the Chief Communications Officer with the Musgrave Group. And her speech was so powerful. She just grimly read out the statistics of the number of women in politics in particular. And it wasn't just that the numbers were so low, but that the pace of change was so slow. And I sat there and I realized I'm on the wrong side on this one. It's never going to change unless you actually kick your way in the door. And those things that Peter was saying about men and their unconscious bias, oh, I'm not sexist and we just got the best man for the job. I have had those things said to my face and I am sick of it. And we're going to have to make it mandatory. Now, I think in politics, it already is working because we have the gender quotas at local authority, and I think it will have to come in for boardrooms as well. And the only caveat I'd put on the boardroom quotas is that when they've done this in, of course, Scandinavian countries where it's utopia and everything's perfect, they found that they were drawing their quota women from a very small pool. So it ended up that the directors that were being chosen were multiple directors of company, and there was one particular woman who was made a director of 90 different companies. I would like to think that if we bring in the quotas for boards, the pool is wider than the small number of women who are already at the C level. And that you choose people with diverse experience, and all these points that everybody has been making is this is not just about gender, it's very much about class, and it's very much about experience. And one funny thing, you know, in recent years there was a lot of controversy about how governments appoint people to boards, and they began to bring in stricter and stricter criteria for how board members would be appointed. And I'm on the mailing list for the state boards appointments that come up, and I've noticed that because they're now expecting people to be so highly qualified for the boards and must follow this strict criteria, they're actually reducing the pool from which they can draw people on boards. And I was appointed to a board in the middle of the recession. It's a board to do with architects and chartered surveyors, and if there are professional misconduct cases, they're brought to this board. And when I was first asked to be, I should say it doesn't get paid, by the way, it costs me money, but public service. When I was first asked to be on the board, I said, but I don't know anything about architecture. I don't know anything about chartered surveyors. I'm not qualified to be on this board. And the brilliant civil servant who was talking to me said, it's not about that. We want lay people who don't have specific experience in these areas, because you'll be bringing a sense of fairness and a sense of what might be good for the public, and just a completely fresh thinking to this board. So I was very nervous and apprehensive about taking it on, but once I got into it, I saw that's exactly what we were doing. So let's just be careful, as I think we probably will end up bringing in quotas for boards, that we're not bringing the same groupthink, the same type of person onto a board just because they're a woman. There's more to it than that. Now, in relation to the media, though, and this has come up, and, you know, again, Linda's presentation there, it's so stark. It's never until you actually see these things to your face that you realize how bad it is. And a couple of months ago, there's an organization called the Institute of International and European Affairs, and it's where all grand politicians go to retire when they can't make speeches in the Dáil anymore. And they have brilliant international public speakers who come. But they had a Brexit meeting a little while ago, and they had a MacGill, but it was set up to be the editors of all the Irish, well, the main Irish newspapers. And there were gasps in the room, including one from me, as the editors of the paper took to the stage, and they were all men. And it was only then I realised that apart from the men who were there, every single Irish newspaper is edited by a man. And it hadn't occurred to me that happened, because there used to be women editors. There was Geraldine Kennedy, there was Anne Harris, there was Claire O'Grady, and they're gone. They're just gone, and mostly involuntarily. And I hadn't realised things were that bad until I saw that them all line up on the stage. So it sickens me that we're still actually having to talk about this, and it still is a problem. And then, of course, I worked in News Talk, and I'm kind of limited in what I can say about my experience of working there, because when I was being fired, and I was being told the reason why I was being fired, and then I was also told that there was a confidentiality clause in my contract, so I was forbidden to tell anybody why I was being fired or about my experience there, and that is for their protection and not mine. But suffice to say that their male-dominated lineup speaks for itself. And they argue that that is justified on the basis of it's a commercial decision, because they're a commercial company. And yet when you look at RTE, and I think RTE have done a fabulous job over the years, look at their lineup of Maren Finucane, Miriam O'Callaghan, Rachel English, Anya Lawler, Claire Byrne, Mary Wilson. They've taken in now Sarah McInerney, my former colleague from News Talk. She's presenting Drive this week. You know, they're making commercial decisions too. And I think, and that actually is why I have never, ever resented, thank God I've never written a column, as far as I know, complaining about the license fee. I am very, very glad that RTE is there and is being publicly subsidised to some degree, not a full degree, but to some degree, and that they can take in women and nurture them and build them into stars and put them there in the radio. And Joe, you were very significant, I think, in building a lot of those careers. Maren Finucane's in particular, I think, you know. So go RTE. Now, on the other hand, though, of course, I was making programs and I was trying to put together panels. And I did come up full square against how difficult it actually can be. Now, I think, is Jane Souter still in the room? Is she here? No. Oh, yes. Hiya, Jane. So Jane and her colleagues at DCU a few years ago did a survey of every radio program on national radio and how they were doing for women's voices. And my program actually came out top in that survey. Which I was really, really proud of because I really had been trying. But the only thing that drove me mad, and I give out about it at the time, so forgive me, Jane, if I repeat it, was that in the press release announcing the results of the survey, they didn't say that I had done the best. Instead, they highlighted the fact that George Hook had done the worst. We shouldn't be surprised, I suppose. I think 83% or something like that of his contributors were male. So for the whole week, all the debate and all the discussion around that issue consisted of a photograph of George Hook and a headline about George Hook and talking about George Hook in the articles. And I was going mad because I was dying for a bit of publicity. I needed my name mentioned so that people would know that I even had a show on News Talk, and maybe if they read about it, they'd tune into it. So I suppose I'm saying when there are women there who are doing things, give us a mention. It really, really is very, very helpful. In terms of putting together the panels, though, in some areas it was difficult. And this was the problem, that you have with things like MacGill, particularly in areas like, for example, economics. The principal, voices in the field are men. When I was trying to get a female economist, I would often rely on Frances Ruan, the former director of the SRI. But I really would genuinely struggle. And then because the economy was the story for quite some time, it was a struggle to get women in those areas. Now, but you can work and go out there and find other voices. So right now, the big discussion is housing. That's what's been going on for the last couple of years. And if I was making a program now on housing, well, the first people I'd automatically pick would be Ronan Lyons and Lurkin Sir and Carl Deisher, and they'd be the top names in my head. And it took me ages to cop on to the fact that there were two brilliant women out in UCD. One of them was Michelle Norris, top on loads of government committees, and I'd never heard of her. And the only reason I came across her was I had gone to a seminar about something, and somebody else said to me, you should try Michelle Norris. So it needs program makers to be out there, not in their newsroom, not in RT, not in News Talk. They actually need to physically get out and go to academic conferences, and that is where you will actually discover the women who are expert in their area. But producers and researchers don't do that. They don't leave the office. I would go to some of these seminars and I would often be the only person from the media there. So you physically have to get out there and then drag the women then onto your panels afterwards. But the other thing, of course, is that producers and researchers are extremely risk averse. They want the safe voice. They want the voice that they know will absolutely guaranteed to deliver for them. And they're terrified often of getting on a new voice in case they're no good. And sometimes I can understand that. As I said in my program, I often got on new voices, and sometimes it would be a disaster. You'd be looking at somebody going, you're wrecking my program, and I gave you this chance, and you're being boring. But you had to keep doing it. So I would say to the producers, and by the way, people want fresh voices. People are so sick of the same old voice or the same old face popping up on a program again, and they already know everything he's going to say. They love to hear a fresh perspective. So it's good for your ratings, as well as being the right thing to do to get somebody new on air. Now, there also was that problem of women saying no. Oh, sorry, my time. Good. Well, then I will wrap up on this one. And it's a point Peter made about men and how men are the ones who have got to speak up. So if they are phoned up and asked to be on a panel, that they are saying to the person, is there another woman on the panel? And just going back to the thing about News Talk, Fintan O'Toole wrote an article about News Talk calling it the most flagrantly sexist public organisation in Enfield, that's the village where I'm from, in Ireland. And I believe, of course, that some of the people in News Talk were absolutely mortally offended by that. I should say, by the way, all the people I worked with in News Talk, the producers and research I worked with, were absolutely fantastic, extremely kind to me, and I'm very proud to call some of them my friends. But there are men, you know, at a high level in that organisation and who are on air who either said nothing about the women all being marched to the door, or say in the case of Ivan Yates, completely defended the station and rather hilariously read out a list of very successful women in the media who used to work at News Talk as evidence that it wasn't a sexist organisation, not realising, of course, that those people had had to leave News Talk in order to be successful. And I would have been so happy if some of those men had spoken publicly about what was going on, because as long as it's just the women complaining, well, we just sound like sore losers. It absolutely must be the men who speak up and who say, no, we have to push women forward. And just finally to say that, yeah, it is really depressing that in 2018, I'm having to say that. It's a journey that I personally had to travel in my own politics, that I never wanted to arrive at that position, and yet here I am. So, men, give us a hand up and you will get it back from us one day. Thank you.